at this time, we would like to call to the podium Kabir Hypolite, and Kabir will give us the occasion and opening reflections. Kabir is the director of the Office of AIDS Administration of Oakland County, California. Kabir.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I am just very, very excited to be in this moment. I didn't know if we would have 60 or 70 or 10, but each of you that's actually here and is making this way, and those who are coming, deeply, deeply welcome. And just very, very pleased to see you all. Can you all hear me in the back?
No.
Okay. I get told that I have a soft voice, so I'm going to try to pump it up just a little bit. How about now? Can you hear me?
A little better.
Okay, a little bit. I was asked to actually share some reflections. I certainly want to welcome all of the ministers and speakers. I'm hoping my colleague, Dr. Morgaya, will actually be able to be here today. She had an emergency yesterday evening, so I have her epidemiologist presentation. I have to put in a disclaimer. Disclaimer number one, I'm not an epidemiologist, I'm a lawyer. But I have seen some of the numbers. Of course, we work together all the time, so I will try to get through those. Hopefully, Dr. Hyman, maybe Dr. Hyman can actually interpret some of the slides as we get started. I'll enlist you in the service. In any event, that will come later on in the program, so we will see if she can join us. So, the talk that I wanted to just give you briefly, about 15 minutes, so we'll keep you on track. This is entitled Surfing the Sea of Ambiguity, which is a phrase that I sort of coined years and years ago, and I think it will become plain as I share with you just some personal reflections that Reverend Saunders asked me to do. So in January of 2012, Reverend Saunders introduced himself to me while I was at the 2013 National African American MSM Leadership Conference in New Orleans. Reverend Saunders, as you know, is the senior servant of the Metropolitan Interdenominational Church in Nashville, Tennessee, and I had not met him before. He asked me, though, if I would be interested in collaborating with him to host an African American Ministers Conference in Alameda County. And of course, I jumped at the opportunity, and we have worked closely all year long to bring this conference here to reality today. So I want to thank you again. So I wanted to start by just sharing some reflections over, I guess, my life, about what has brought me here. And I thought I would tell you a little bit of my story in the hope that you might find some of it helpful and instructive. So I want to begin by saying that in 1978, I almost drowned on senior pet day. I was 18. My entire high school, my senior class, had defected to Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk. I mean, I'm just kind of rushing to get my son in school and get there. I'll get it together. So we were all down at Santa Cruz Beach on the boardwalk, and this was my first time at the Pacific Ocean. And naively, I had decided to try body surfing after spending the morning learning how to skimboard, and play on beach volleyball, and frisbee, and football. Have you ever done any of those activities on the beach? Running and moving in sand takes a lot of energy out of you. It was a bright, hot, sunny day. I was 18, wasn't thinking about all that. So what I also didn't realize is that, and I'm going to give you just a picture of Santa Cruz Beach. If you all have ever been there, it's kind of like this crescent shape. And there's a big sandbar that kind of extends way, way, way out into the ocean. So you can actually walk out way, way out there. The water is really essentially up to your waist. So all my classmates were out there body surfing. They knew, I think most of them knew what they were doing. And what I didn't realize is that the waves come in sort of from the north to the south, and they press from the west to the east. So the sandbar drops off. So keep that in mind as I go through this. So the waves, I was catching them, I was learning how to do this thing. The waves were pushing me closer and closer to the edge of the sandbar, which I did not recognize. And the drop off, of course, was again precipitous. When I took the last wave, I was swept over the edge and discovered that there was no bottom. The sandbar was gone. Suddenly, the waves became more powerful, and they thundered down on my head like waves, dragging me under. And so surprised, I fought my way to the water surface. There was one classmate, a gentleman named Mike Cuban dog, who I'll never forget. He noticed me. He shouted, "Do you need some help?" But at that point, I was so physically exhausted after the earlier sports activities and what have you that I couldn't actually get enough breath to shout, and I couldn't lift my arms out of the water. So, receiving no response from me, Mike swam back to the rest of my class, leaving me alone. I was a little annoyed. So I looked behind me, and that was the first time I realized just how far out. Because remember, that beach is like a crescent, so when you start out here, by the time you get down here, you're much further away. So everybody on the beach looked like little ants, and the waves were just crashing down. It was at that moment that I realized that I could drown. I'm not a very strong swimmer, but I do know how to swim, honestly. So for a moment I thought I could panic, but I thought to myself, if you panic, you will die. So I had a split second to decide that I wanted to live. And then the next wave hit me. And it was nearly impossible to describe the kind of feelings of uncertainty and struggling to regain the surface, feeling like there was no more fight left in me. I tried every swimming stroke that I could muster to reach the edge of the shore. And I wasn't sure if I was going to survive. I was pounded by waves and swept under by the currents. The experience seemed interminable and terrible. And then as I drifted closer to the shore, the waves dragged me out across the bottom of the ocean. And I was scraped and bruised by rocks just rolling around by this current. Rocks and shells and sand, and Lord only knows what was down there. So then suddenly, I was in the surf, and the whole thing was over. Nobody knew what I had just experienced so intensely. And I kind of lay on the sand for just a moment, feeling utterly by myself, even though I was in the midst of all my friends. It's kind of like being HIV positive sometimes. But a few years later, I would remember that feeling of what I now call surfing the sea of ambiguity. So I want to fast forward to 1982. I was now 22. And after college years full of some thoughts about suicide by being gay, I had finally accepted my own sexuality and decided to drive to the famous, or infamous, San Francisco Castro gay Mecca. And having just arrived, I stood on the corner of 18th and Castro. There was a copy of a community newspaper called Coming Up, which some of you might remember. It caught my eye. And I flipped through it only to find a story about 12 gay men who had died of a strange new disease in New York City called GRID, or gay-related immunodeficiency. My immediate thought was, how am I going to survive this? And it was almost as if somebody had heard my thoughts. There was a voice, it sounded like somebody was standing right next to me, and said, "You won't." I was so startled that I looked around to see if somebody actually was standing next to me, and there was nobody there. So I was a little rattled. I put the community newspaper back in the rack, and I immediately let the cat go. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit more to 1983. And this is very short. I fell in love in Los Angeles. It was a very brief but very intense romance. And that's the story for another day. Suffice to say that, unfortunately, my father died of AIDS years later. So fast forward with me once again to 1989. Can you all still hear me in the back? Can you still hear me? A little bit more? Okay. Fast forward to 1989. I am now an associate litigator in a big law firm, feeling like Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. If you've ever read that book, you know what I'm talking about. I never lost a case, but the firm's partners looked right through me when we passed in the hallway. That is until one day when a senior business partner called me to his office for a special assignment. And I have to explain, if you're a litigator, you don't do business law. In business law, you don't do litigation. So I'm wondering, why is a senior business partner calling me to his office? He said he wanted to impress an African-American client that he was trying to import business from. And he said, quote, I just need someone who looks like you. I decided it was time to go. But about that time, I also felt like it was time for me to get tested for HIV. I never received tests before. So I gave notice before the test because I didn't want my test results to shape my decision about leaving the firm. I knew I had made the right decision to leave. My results came back positive, and the doctors told me to arrange my affairs. They said, there'll be good days and there'll be bad days. And then sort of dismissively sent me off to see a nurse. And after muttering a few choice words that I will repeat here, I went to see the nurse. And for a moment, I contemplated retracting my resignation from my firm. After all, I had no job at that point, no benefits, and no support. But I knew I made the healthy choice. So when I saw the nurse, she told me two things that I have always shared with my friends and clients ever since. And I'll share them with you now. She said two things. First of all, she said, don't die of the diagnosis. Secondly, she said, do your own research. And I thought, great. I just figured out how to get through law school. I'm the first one to go to graduate school in my family. And that was a big enough chore. And now I have to become a microbiologist. So I went home and I sat for about 3 months, unemployed, just kind of flew my jets, taking it all in. And every time I started to relax, a thought would kind of creep in and said, you know what? You can't be enjoying yourself. You're supposed to be dying. And after all, this is again 1989, 1990. AIDS was supposed to be, and was for many of us, about suffering and death. But then another spirit kicked in. I said, wait a minute, I thought. There have always been epidemics since the dawn of time. And there have always been survivors. And we call them statistical fluke because we can't explain sometimes how they survive. So I realized my job was to become a statistical fluke. I was ready to serve the seed and beauty again. So fast forward again to 1990, I took a job as the client services director for the AIDS legal referral panel in San Francisco. First job I saw in the newspaper, and I thought, I can do that. Within a few weeks, I met my first long-term survivor. He was a white gay man from Texas. His name was Douglas. He taught me a great deal, but at first he didn't want to tell me anything. We had to basically talk about some of his legal questions and then ask a few demographic questions such as, when were you first diagnosed with HIV or AIDS? And he told me he was already past his AIDS diagnosis by 6 years. This is 1990. So I asked him how he thought he had managed to survive. It was my first statistical fluke on the phone. I want to know. He said, I don't want to talk about that. I have to do it in his Texas accent. I don't want to talk about that. He said, I talked to health departments, to the CDC, the NIH, and Congress. Hell, I sent White House letters. Nobody wants to hear what I have to say. So I paused for a moment and I said, with all due respect, I'm listening, and I would like to hear what you have to say. So he let me in. The first thing he said was, AIDS was sent here to heal the planet. And I was shocked. So it seemed like such an appalling thing to say when so many people were suffering and dying. But he went on, and I realized what he meant. He said, in order to survive AIDS, to live with AIDS and HIV, you have to re-examine every fundamental assumption by which you live your life. That's a tall order, but that's what it takes to become a statistical fluke. That's what you do when you serve the seed ambiguity. So I went on to counsel thousands of clients over the next 6 years as the client services director of the AIDS panel, and I have become a statistical fluke, and of course that's become much easier now with the advent of protease inhibitors and all the medications that we have. So the spirit inside my heart has always told me never to buy into conventional wisdom. Never. Because there's always a higher power, and I know that all of you will understand and appreciate that. The Bible commands us, above all other things, get the understanding. That's one of my favorite quotes. So I'm here today to ask you to help me to breathe that spirit into all of our African American brothers and sisters and all those who are living with HIV and AIDS, HIV positive or HIV negative. And as God's servants, I'm asking you to help me as a public servant to help those who will fight HIV/AIDS, even though they may be under assault by poverty and discrimination, sexism, racism, homophobia, substance abuse, gun violence, incarceration, materialism, and so many other social determinants that we at the Public Health Department struggle with every day. So let me close by saying just a couple things. Once I had a dream in which I met God. For just a brief moment, we were face to face. I know that as ministers, you will appreciate how the certainty of such moments is so intensely personal, they're difficult to share. But in my face-to-face encounter, we were laughing, God and I. And he spoke to me as a gay man. He said, I'm so very glad that you have finally realized that you have not been boxing with me. No one, no priest, no minister, no pastor, no bishop, no pope, has the power or the permission to separate us from God. But perhaps the greatest spiritual gift that I think that ministers can give to African American LGBT who are questioning folks is to remind them of that, because we so often hear something very different. So I want to extend my thanks to Reverend Saunders for approaching me in January, and to Bishop Yvette Plunder, who is joining us. Is she here? She'll be here soon. Oh, she's blind. For working with me and the Office of AIDS Administration and our staff and our volunteers to bring about this very, very important day here in Allen County and Oakland. I welcome each of our guests, Reverend Terry Terrell. I don't see David Howell, but I think he's on the list. Dr. Neil Guy, Adrian McCall, Dean James Hildreth, Reverend Ron Sadler, Reverend Dr. James Forbes, and all of you who have assembled here to share, to listen, and to heal. May God bless you and keep you on your surfboards as you journey across the sea and unity together. Thank you.